Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Loreweek. I'm your host, Bob. We're going to be renaming this the Bob Week to stay on brand. And then we're going to start having Bob runs and Bobinations. I hope everyone's looking forward to that. Come on. There we go. World am I listening to? I don't recognize this song. I hope everyone's doing okay today. We're going to talk about some random stuff. And we're going to do a slightly new feature, something I've been thinking about doing for a while now. Nothing big. Don't worry about it. And then, we're going to do the most important thing of all, which is kill all humans. But that can wait. So... music's loud? Seriously? At 20% it's loud? Alright. How about this? How's that for audio volume? Like, I can barely hear it now. I swear to God, OBS just does a really weird audio thing, because it's always a problem. I get so many complaints all the time about the music being too loud, and it's just like, really? Really? Okay. If you insist. Even with the ducking, and even with me, it's still too loud. Still too loud! Alright, here, how about this? Is this better? I will speak in utter silence! What do you guys think? Alright, let's try this. We just adjusted some settings here. And we'll see how the audio is on that. What's my random discussion? So, fandom is taking over Wiki. I'm not sure what I think about that. In fact, as weird as this may sound, when I heard the news that fandom was taking over Wikia, I was confused because I thought fandom had already owned Wikia. Like, I thought that was old news. So I'm not sure what to make of that. I do love going to Wikia and getting tons and tons of intrusive ads, don't you? It's one of my favorite aspects of going to Wikia. It's like, oh man, I love hearing about all these things I don't give a damn about. It's great. And no, I do not play Fortnite. I am far too boring to play Fortnite. You're welcome, Ann Morkenta. I hope you enjoyed. So yeah, getting back on topic, fandom is taking over Wikia, and they're going to be rebranding everything to fandom, and they're going to be just making it nice and official that fandom owns everything. I'm actually kind of curious if we're going to see a situation in which fandom ads get worse or better. I am the Boar Runner. That is true. What else? We know when the new Walking Dead game is going to finish coming out, roughly. The ETA for the final episode of the new Walking Dead Season 4 is going to be December 18th. So, a playthrough of that will be sometime in mid-December for anybody who cares about me playing through the latest Walking Dead game. I will not be even looking at it otherwise because, you know, we'll be waiting until the game is fully out. What else? There's a game coming out next year. It has Chris Avellone working on the writing. I always say that because some people seem to be very interested in Chris Avellone as a writer. But it's called Burden of Command. It's going to be set in a style of you leading a personal RPG-style thing in order to try and strategize your way through the World War II Western Front. The focus is supposed to be more on the individual stories and the people, rather than, you know, actually being a strategy game. It sounded interesting enough that I put it on my watch list. So how's the audio volume now that I've adjusted it down by another 10 decibels? Also, I do use tons and tons of hair conditioner. It's the only way to keep my hair styled properly. I don't know why people don't want to touch the Eastern Front. What else? Let's see. Walking Dead, fandom, Burden of Command. What else is there? Gnarlex asked me to look at something which I don't understand. Something about YouTube burnout. So when he shows up, I intend to ask him about that. Yes, Hazardous, that's correct. It's going to be a strategy game focused entirely on the story of the individual soldiers, hence the name Burden of Command. So. Now, for those of you not aware, I have a Tumblr. Now, my Tumblr, how could a strategy game focus on story? I don't even understand that question, Micromono. Unless you're being facetious, in which case, never mind. I mean, we can't possibly have story in a strategy game, right? That's just insane. Anyways. So, one of the things that I have, I have a Tumblr, and I've been using it as a Q&A forum for its entirety of its existence. That's the entire reason I have a Tumblr. I have been told by several people that that is the proper use of Tumblr, but I am well aware of the incredibly negative reputation that Tumblr has, and as a consequence, I always have to add an asterisk when I say, I have a Tumblr. Like, every time I have to do that. So that being stated, I have a Tumblr, and I use it as a Q&A forum. You can ask questions anonymously, and I get a fairly large amount of questions on a fairly regular basis. So in that sense, it's been, successful. But I mention this because sometimes I get questions that are lengthy questions, big questions, right? Where it's like, oh my god, I have to... How in God's name can I possibly answer this question in text format, Like, I had one person once ask, alright, tell me... Here's these 20 characters. Tell me what all of their specific stories would be in Warcraft or Kingdom Hearts, for example. It's like I don't know how to answer that question. So what I'm going to start doing going forward is I'm going to kind of repeat something that I used to do about 6 or so years ago, and start answering some of the major Tumblr questions, the really big ones, on Loreweek, and mention this here instead. I don't want to list that. So I have 2 questions for this week, which I'll be answering on camera, and I just wanted to share that for anybody, so that if you're wondering, that's kind of the way going forward. Also, for those of you not aware, we have a new background. Nobody mentioned it at all, which makes me really sad, actually, given the amount of time and effort and work they put into this. Thanks to Kay for the 3D rendering, and as ever, his efforts and assistance are massively appreciated. We had to really jury-rig this to make it work properly, but I like the results. I think it looks good. I hope to actually have another thing in the future, but we'll see where that goes. Depends on what we can come up with. It is covered by the chat, but it's always covered by the chat. So, I mean, if you want, you could just go back to the old terrible background. But yeah, I think it looks good, even with the chat over it, in my opinion. I suppose you did see it yesterday. But, now it's the actual implementation. Because you actually did not see this yesterday. And I can actually go ahead and explain what I mean by that. Because if I get rid of this, you'll notice that there's some issues with the actual render over there. And I know you probably can't see it because your window's too small, but let's just say that looks like crap with the outline. But when we blend this properly, a couple of proper filters, I think it looks a lot better. Anyways. So let's go ahead and move on to our next actual topic. Which would be Steam.tv. That's actually not the topic. So for those of you not aware, Steam is launching their own streaming service. Before I go into anything else, what do you think of that? Are any of these songs, not horribly bombastic? This one should be okay. I heard a comment. Given the usual level of quality control we have from Steam, Steam.tv might turn into our next Pornhub. So Steam.tv is Steam's old streaming service. There you go. Now, I don't actually have a lot to say about Steam doing its own streaming service that by itself. There's the old saying that competition is good. The more I think about that saying, the more I question it. Like, I feel like that's too dismissive of a statement. Let me ask you a slightly different question. If there were, let's give you a hypothetical. If there were, for example, 15 different streaming services up, and all of them were viable for one reason or another, what would you think about that? Hi, Gary. Also, Zendala forever! Let's assume that whatever you care about is stretched out across all 15 streaming services. So, in other words, there is something that interests you on all of them. If you're paying attention, this is actually very similar to a topic we've already covered. Because, I suppose, as with all things, moderation might be needed here. Because the idea of everyone and their brother having a digital distribution service, and having their own TV service, and having their own streaming service, it does not appeal to me. To be completely blunt. It's like, okay, so you want me to watch Star Trek on Discovery's thing. You want me to watch Star Wars on Disney's thing. You want me to watch, you know, other movies and shows I care about on Netflix, and then there's Amazon service, which has the Amazon exclusives. And that's just a handful. That's just, what, 5? Hang on. Discovery, Disney, Discovery, Disney, Netflix. That's 4. That's only 4 streaming services, and that already pushes my own personal perspective on that, too. Really? Like, I don't particularly feel the desire to be subscribed to 3 separate streaming services just to get all the things I care about, right? Which brings to mind the idea of why people in the past have done the Netflix thing. It's a form of outsourcing. I don't watch anything on Hulu. There's nothing on Hulu for me. But you're right, Hulu is also on the list there. And if I had cable, that would be on the list. Obviously I don't, but you know, having local cable is part of that too. It's CBS All Access or whatever, but I keep calling it Discovery because it's the only thing I care about on it. Yeah, exactly, Upon a Time. It's the same issue with having to launch Steam, to launch Uplay, to launch my game. There's a reason I don't buy stuff on Origins if I can avoid it. Now, what I find interesting about this, so let's talk about there's a real topic here. Let's talk about the pluses and minuses of having your own system from the company's perspective. Now, the plus is obvious. You are directing people to your service, whether it's a streaming service or a digital distribution service or a television network or whatever it is. The benefit is that you control what they see. So you can basically do your own internalized advertising, plug things you want to be plugged, and kind of push whatever it is you want to be pushed. You also gain basically all of the profit from that. So you don't actually have to give any of the pot to someone else. Now those are the obvious and immediate benefits. And I have a really strong feeling that most people looking at that are looking at that like, those are the only variables involved. Obviously, we want to have control of our own ads, and we want to have control of our own money. Like Hazardous says, you don't need to pay rent. The downside I have already listed, if you were paying attention. The downside is, oh, another service. Well, I'll think about it for a little bit of time. Because it is a proven fact that the people will be less likely to pick up things on a separate service. They'll think about it, and some people will, but there will be lost sales there. So, to use a direct example, Discovery, Star Trek Discovery, is demonstrably getting less viewing figures and less sales figures because of the fact that that is on its own CBS All Access. If that was on Netflix or Hulu or a pre-existing service, more people would be watching it, generating more ad revenue and generating more money in general. Now the question is, and I don't have an answer to this, but the question is whether or not the loss of sales is worth the loss of rent, if you follow me. And again, I don't know the answer to that. But I really feel like too many companies are just jumping on a bandwagon without actually thinking about the long-term economic drawbacks of everyone trying to do their own thing. It will, and the more there are, the worse it gets. So Disney, CBS, Hulu, Netflix, Amazon, and HBO or whatever, right? So that's 6 things. In my opinion, that's already too many, but that's just me. Well, how bad would it be if it got up to 16 different streaming services for all the different shows out there, right? Like, I suppose we could add Sky to the list. And all of them require money, as Max Time points out. Now, Amazon's kind of a gimme for me because I get a lot of value out of the free shipping. So I just have Amazon Prime. So Amazon's kind of a gimme, but I have to pay for Netflix, which I do because of my niece, because that has a lot of offerings for my niece. But that's it. I don't pay for anything else unless it's something for the show. And usually I just, like, I gotta be blunt, I don't usually watch a movie, like, okay, if I have to watch a movie for the show, I will do one of 2 things. Is it on Netflix? Nope. Okay. Do I own it? No. Okay. Then I will go ahead and rent it for like $2 on Amazon, and I'll just watch it on my computer. That's my usual method for watching movies for these kind of things. I actually agree with you, Blue Wolf Alex. Admittedly, I don't know as much about the ridiculous cable offerings, other than the fact that they were ridiculous, got out of control, stopped making as much money, and then kind of nosedived. Now, there's still a lot of TV packages, but to use a direct example, if I wanted cable right now, and I looked this up, there are 3 packages I could get for television, instead of like the 8 that I used to be able to get. The... what, Gary? Oh, I get what you're saying. I could, but I don't. Anyways, so this is what I'm thinking. Okay, so right now let's talk about streaming. Let's get to the specific topic. So right now we have Twitch and YouTube, and that's kind of it. I stream on Twitch. It's actually within possibility for me to stream to both Twitch and YouTube simultaneously. I can do that. I'm not going to, because there's just not a lot of benefit for me for streaming on YouTube other than the possibility of getting more viewers, which is not something that's super high on my priority list. And it's kind of a weird hassle to set up in addition to that. So that's kind of it. It will also destroy my pipe, that's true. And if I ever got Google Fiber, I might be a little more inclined to do the double streaming thing. The mixed chats is the really hard part. See, the thing is, I actually streamed on YouTube several times. Some of you may remember this. And I found the streaming service to be acceptable if I did not care about my chat. That was my big thing. As long as I didn't care about what was going on in chat and basically ignored it, it was a pretty decent streaming service. Very reliable, very low latency, very little delay. But I kind of care about this. That's why it takes up like a third of my screen, right? So this is why I stream on Twitch. So what I could do, if I wanted to be completely insane, I've actually thought about this, is I could have like that chat for Twitch, and then I could have like this chat, like YouTube chat right here, and then I'm just like behind everything. Or something along those lines. Because I don't know of any method to literally combine the 2 chats into a single program. So, we'll see. Either way, no matter how I'm looking at that, it's something that isn't really interesting to me. There's just not a lot of benefit for streaming on YouTube. So I'm pretty much locked into Twitch. Now the Steam thing's coming out. I can't see any reason why I would use Steam.tv. Now, Steam.tv, we don't know a lot of details yet. So it may or may not actually be a reasonable streaming service. The biggest guess that people have right now is it's going to be a Steam, excuse me, let me phrase that more accurately, a Valve-focused streaming service, Dota 2 is something we already know they're streaming. The idea of them streaming Counter-Strike or Team Fortress 2 or Dota 2 or Half-Life or whatever is something that's feasible. And if they want to do that, that's fine. But I have to admit, I just can't perceive any reason why I would either watch or stream on that service now. Because of the problem I already mentioned. Because it's just another streaming service. And keeping in mind, there are streaming services other than YouTube and Twitch. I have looked into many of those. Again, some of you may remember that. Especially when Twitch was really pissing me off. Several years ago, I looked into a lot of different streaming services, tried a lot of different streaming services, and hated all of them. So, we'll see, I suppose. But yeah, this topic is just interesting to me. I really feel like too many companies look at this kind of situation and say, oh, we could do that too. And they're filled with BitChute? I don't think so. But I am terrified because Valerian just donated a lot of money. God damn it, Valerian. I know you don't make that much money. I mean, actually, I guess that's not true. I know you make a lot of money. What the hell, man? For the bad fund. I am grateful. I am, in fact, extremely grateful because you guys don't know this, and you have no way of knowing this, but I actually, as soon as I cut off stream yesterday, I spent some time rearranging my room, Tetrising, basically, to, to set up where the new mattress is going to go. And I know you don't care, but I actually managed to make it work, because one of the biggest problems I'm having is that I am on a single bed, and I am a large person. Like, I'm not that fat, but I am a large person. I'm very broad, and sleeping on a single does actually give me legitimate back pains, simply because of the fact that it's difficult for me to move around on the bed. So I'm going to be switching up to a double, which means I need more space for it, which means I had to completely rearrange my entire setup in my room in order to make space for it. I wasn't actually, one of the things I've been holding back on in buying a new mattress was waiting to make sure I could fit it into my room and, still be comfortable with it. I can! We did it! Woo! I'm actually really happy about that, but I finally discovered a way to make it work. There's like a little corridor you have to walk through there. But, well, getting a wide or a double or whatever is basically going to be the same relative price as it is, and is also going to be the same space requirement. Space requirement was the big requirement, and space works. Woo! I've made it work. I mean, I don't mean to complain, but the biggest size consumer for my room is this. Like, I've got lighting set up, I've got green screen, I've got my additional lighting set up, I have my desk, I have my actual equipment right there and right there. I take up something like 80% of my room with my streaming setup and my recording setup. I feel selfish, Blue Wolf Alex, if I'm being completely honest with you. Anyways, I guess I don't have anything else to say about this topic, so I suppose we'll see here. Let's move on. While we're talking about television, let's talk about Neilson ratings. How many of you know what Neilson ratings are, in specific or in detail? Now, my family's only been a Neilson family once. This is a long time ago. This is back in California. And I know a couple friends who have been Neilsons a couple of times. So, that's right, I actually talked about it in my Voyager stuff, didn't I? Neilson ratings, so once upon a time, Neilson ratings were how television decided how popular television was. It was pretty much the only... I might actually be spelling that wrong. Hang on, let me look that up. Nielsen ratings. I am spelling it wrong. It's Nielsen. Hang on a second. It's actually Nielsen. There we go. That's how it's spelled. Sorry. Anyway, so now Neilson ratings are awful. Let's just start with that. However, it was pretty much the only method people had to determine how popular any given show or program was back in the day, because how else do you do it? I'm pretty sure this is a state-specific thing. I've never heard of this being done outside the States. Yeah, they still use these as reporting figures. They still do them. They just are immensely irrelevant. So, oh yeah, that's a good point. You're right, I should actually switch that to the next topic. What's it called? Resistance, I think? Something like that. Anyways. So, the way it would work is certain families... Hi, Jimmy Bailey. Certain families would be selected to be Neilson families for periods of time, like 5 hours, or 5 months, excuse me. And what would happen is you get a packet. And you pull up the packet, you open up the packet, and you've got like a list of television programs across a week. And what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to jot down, okay, this is what we put here, and this is what we watched here, and this is what we watch here, and so forth and so on. Now, later on, as Maverick points out, they actually gave you an additional box, which you would attach to your cable box in order to literally track what you were watching. But in both cases, it was trying to accomplish the same thing, a method by which studios could decide and see how popular any given show was. They were notoriously inaccurate, and everyone kind of acknowledged that they were inaccurate, and everyone kind of acknowledged that there was nothing they could do about it. There was just no real feasible method of getting truly accurate data. So everyone just kind of agreed to use Neilson ratings. I personally believe that that's one of the reasons that Neilson ratings are still used to this day. Is because it's like, whatever, it works, right? Thing is, it doesn't work anymore. Because, also you would get a stipend, like $75 for doing this. Just a pittance of money. Anyways, nowadays, in more modern times, thanks to streaming television, it is more capable and accurate to not only determine what you watch, but how much of what you watch. In other words, think about it this time. Really, Emperor Valerian, that's funny. By the way, thank you very, very much, Emperor Valerian, if I didn't say it already. If you'd like to put that towards anything other than the mattress fund, please let me know. And thank you again. Nowadays, a company can literally say, this many people have watched this many minutes of this many shows. And I know that Amazon, at the very least, actually uses this as a metric. This is such a weird... Are there no peaceful songs here? Here. Amazon, I know Amazon specifically uses this as a metric. I don't know if Netflix does. So they will determine based on minutes. They will rate the minutes watched, and that will be how popular any given show is, and how much deserving of attention or money or funding, or whether it gets renewed for another season, is all based on that minute data. Now that is extremely accurate, because it's literally how much time has been spent streaming that show. So it's probably the most accurate possible results. It does mean they're pulling your data for doing so, but in the same way that, for example, YouTube does. And, of course, yeah, that also determines how much they charge for ads for those particular programs, too. This is very useful information, and I know this sounds weird, but I'm actually fully in favor of this. It is not only much more accurate, but it is actually, I know this is going to sound weird, less intrusive. Rather than having to install an additional box on your television or having to fill out a survey every week, you just watch what you want to watch, and they will track what you're watching. Now, so the reason this was being brought up was someone actually brought up the question, how does Neilson rating work then versus now? And we've seen this extensively. Again, I've only really studied the Amazon side of this because there are several Amazon shows I've been interested in, and I've been looking into the making of and behind-the-scenes aspect of these. And it turns out that Amazon has been paying a lot of attention to a lot of these specific things, trying to make sure to plug shows that have... I have no idea, Zithler. Trying to plug shows that have less minutes, and trying to oversell shows that have more minutes. If you pull up Amazon... Here, I'll do it right now. Let's see what happens. I'm going to pull up Amazon Video, which I have on my phone. Right here. So the first thing I see is it's plugging its originals, of course. And of course, it's plugging All or Nothing, Goliath, and the... and The Marvelous Miss Maisel. So that's one I actually know about this. That The Marvelous Miss Maisel, or however the hell you're supposed to say that, was actually renewed for a second season because of the amount of minutes that that show was pulling in, and thus they know that it's fairly popular. Then it immediately below that, it shows all of their original series, which is All or Nothing, Goliath, Ordeal by Innocence, A Very English Scandal, Grand Tour, Man in the High Castle, all that fun stuff. That's not an original. Oh, it is an original. Never mind. And then immediately below that, it shows shows that it thinks I'm interested in based on the stuff I've already seen. Which is a very amusing list, by the way. We've got MCU movies, Jurassic Park stuff, Godfather's on here. Anyways. I mention this, though, because as much as this sounds weird, I'm much more in favor of this method right here. While I don't like intrusive ads, I find, let's call them front page ads, to be acceptable. A front page ad is exactly what I just showed you. The Miss Maisel thing, right? That's a front page ad. I pull up the app and it's the first thing right at the top. It gets the most physical real estate on my screen. I don't mind that because that's not really that intrusive to me, as opposed to, say, an autoplay ad, for example, or an autoplay audio ad, or an ad that I have to literally physically remove and to interact with something. I don't find that kind of stuff. I don't find the real estate kind of ad to be particularly intrusive, and so I'm okay with accepting that as a consequence of having access to what it is I want. So I like this new system a lot better than the old Neilson system, and I hope we get to see this used properly in the future. The problem is it would be relatively easy for any of these particular companies to try and abuse this feature in order to try and push things in the wrong directions. This also leads to another topic, and this is a semi-unrelated topic. But all I'm going to say is that there are two different types of philosophies when it comes to approaching these kind of problems. You either spend all your resources on the thing that's most successful, or you spend your resources on all the stuff that's least successful. The idea here being, so if you have let's just make up numbers. You have a 10 rating show and a 100 rating show. You either dump all your money on the 100 rating show to make it even bigger, or you dump your money on the 10 show to make it bigger, to try and get that 10 number up. And that's a completely different topic I don't want to discuss right now, but so far it seems that Amazon is doing kind of a mix of both. Netflix is doing a thing where they literally actually receive more money in order to plug certain shows. Whatever. Not that I'm aware, Hazardous, considering that a huge number of people doing it, including YouTube, as I mentioned earlier. I mean, really. Hang on a second. Nope. No, I don't see how that would even begin to violate the Fourth Amendment. The Fourth Amendment, word for word, is the right of people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures, which shall not be violated, and no warrants shall issue but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. That prevents the government from taking my stuff, not finding out my info. Now, that can be argued, and the Constitution can and has been argued for years, so let's not even get into that. Let's talk about Star Wars. Oh, I could also talk about the privacy policies topic, but that's another topic entirely. Then we'll get to Q&A 1. Good morning, Interstellar. So, the Star Wars Resistance trailer came out. Before I say anything else, what'd you guys think of it? Yeah, I talked about that last week, Bandard. Of course, Mike Romano, no one else in the world has human rights. Duh, isn't that just obvious? There is no rest of the world! The other side of the Pacific, Todd? Well, that's New York. Hey, something classic. Any other thoughts before I continue? Now, I suppose my initial thoughts will not surprise anyone. I didn't like the art style. Now, that's just a preference thing. But I have to admit that the moment I saw it, the first thing I thought was, "Bleh, that looks awful." And that's going to be hard to overcome, even if the show is actually good. Because I'm basically going to have to just tolerate the art style in exchange for, what may or may not be a good show. That's just a preference thing. I'm not trying to, speak ill of it or whatever. I much preferred the Clone Wars and Rebels approach to the art style. Do kids' shows run that late? No. No. Ow. Ah, my back. This is why I'm looking into a mattress. I gotta stretch every morning. Well, I don't blame you, Corellis. I know several people who do. So, the art style, bleh. What's the next thing I have to say about it? I know that sounds so strange, but my overall reaction was just, is that it? That's all you got? Now, again, it's hard to judge a show based on a trailer, but I have to admit the premise doesn't really interest me either. I feel like you could do some interesting stories in the intervening period between Return of the Jedi and Force Awakens. I really do. But I don't think focusing on the Resistance is the best way to do that. My opinion. I know that sounds like a strange thing, but, I mean, we've kind of already seen this before, haven't we? How many times have we seen, Alright, here's the plucky rebels, and they're slowly developing fight against the enemy thing. Right? In general, never mind just in Star Wars. So, okay. So I'm not really interested in the premise. I'm not really interested in the art style, and so far nothing about, anything else, the voice acting or the dialogue really strikes me as particularly interesting. Now, as with all things, I'm not going to judge it now, but I was asked to talk about the trailer, and all I could say is, and? Again, I'm not trying to say that it's bad. I just have no interest in it. It's like you just put out a... well, I don't know. It's like you just put out a hockey game. Okay, I just have no personal interest in hockey. So look at that like, okay. Hey guys, there's a new hockey game. I don't know, I'm having a hard time properly explaining how little I care about this. And again, I'm not trying to sound toxic or negative or anything like that. We will see. Now, that being stated, I agree with something that someone in chat said. Who was that? It was Hazardous. Why not focus on something like, focus on the Remnant during this time period, or maybe just focus on the parts of the galaxy that aren't really usually covered, right? Maybe have a series set in Hutt space. Maybe we should be set over in the political drama of what's going on at this time. Remember, the Republic was going through some stupid crap at this point in history in the AU. So we've got political, we've got the remnant of the Empire, we've got the the underbelly. You could focus on the First Order if you want to. I would literally be more interested if they focused in anything else in Star Wars at this point of time than the Resistance. Now, again, try not to be too judgmental, but what I really want to know is if this show is going to be exclusive to Disney new streaming service, in which case my interest has also dropped even further for the reasons we discussed earlier, because I don't want to subscribe to another new service. Right? I don't want to be like, oh, goody, well, let me go ahead and sub to, another streaming service just so I can get other shows. No. At best, I might, we as a family might pool in for a Disney service, streaming service, just for the kiddo, and that's it. Whatever. I don't have anything else to say. It's just like, yeah, okay. We'll see where they go with it. Lord knows that Clone Wars and Rebels both had their own issues. The Chiss? Who are those? Actually, quick side note, just really quick. Was I the only person who, when I first saw Cad Bane, I thought he was a chiss? I'm just curious. He's a Duro, for those of you not aware, but... that would be awesome, Hazardous. But then again, I also am of the really weird opinion that we need to have less focus on Force users in Star Wars. I know that sounds strange, but I've had that opinion for years. And they just keep not doing it. So... anywho, speaking of Star Wars, let's answer our first Q&A question. And I'm going to ask this question to you guys, too. There we go. So, the first question we're going to answer today... oh, let me get the timestamp. God, so stupid.
Your dedication will be rewarded.
I'm apparently even stupider than I thought. Thank you very, very much, Vigilant. But what did you donate towards? He donated towards Dark Messiah, which is still on the list. I still need to look into it. It's right here. I haven't forgotten it. It's right here. And I will put that towards the Dark Messiah thing, assuming I say yes to it. I just haven't had time to look into it, but I haven't forgotten Vigilant. Thank you. Alright, so the first question, and again, I'm going to ask you guys this. So it's basically Star Wars Tier 3. Now, how many of you know what I mean when I say Tier 3? The more yeses, the happier I will be, but please be honest. No. Oh, Takoida knew. Blue Wolf Alex knew. Zedslayer knew. Django knew. It's Tears of Insertion. Once upon a time, this may sound strange, but one of the things that, in my experience, is one of the most talked about, and I've seen this so often it's ridiculous, one of the most talked about speculations about fictional settings is the Tears of Insertion. In other words, we've got Tier 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Now, that's my own personal terminology for it and my own organization for it. Because how many times have you or a friend or someone you've known asked the question, so you're in Star Wars, what do you do? Or, if you're, if you're tossed into Final Fantasy III, what would you do? That kind of a question, right? I mean, it's an extremely common topic. So after a while, this was before I even started the show, this was years ago, I sat down and I just I made an organized chart, Tier 1 through 5. It's on my website. As for what the tiers of insertion were. Basically defining the rules so we could properly discuss it. So I got a question here that said, if you were transported to Star Wars in a Tier 3 transportation, what would you do? Now, there's more to the question, but let me explain what Tier 3 is, and I'll go and pull my own website just to quote myself here. So I'm using a word-for-word definition. Tiers of insertion. Tier 3. Tier 3 is the most common tier that people think when they ask the which setting question of others. Tier 3 involves the convenience features of 1 and the vague choice of 2, but critically will alter the chooser to acclimate to the setting. So to explain what I mean by that really quick. Tier 1 means you have the ability to speak or understand the languages or whatever the setting. So we would be able to speak... no, I mean insertion, Denoble. So Tier 1, for example, would be... we could speak Arabesh, or read Arabesh, or speak Common or Orcish, or whatever. In other words, we would be able to communicate with the terrain. That's Tier 1. Tier 2 allows you to get a vague idea of where you would end up. In other words... if you say, I want to be in Star Wars, but then someone snaps their finger and puts you in Star Wars, there is a multi-thousand-year gap and an entire galaxy of where you might end up. So Tier 2 allows you a little bit of convenience in that. For example, I want to show up during the Galactic Civil War, or, on Alderaan, which would be the stupidest thing you could possibly do, but, something like that, right? That's Tier 2. Tier 3 has both of those as well as acclimation. This means that if one were to pick a setting which had no humans... such as an odd example, the Cars movies, one would be acclimated to the common species of the setting. That means that if one were put in a setting that had things like magic or psionics or levels, the chooser would now be able to do those things as if they were naturally born within the setting, still confined by what is possible within the setting. So in other words, if you were a tier 3 into Star Wars, the chance that you might be Force sensitive exists. You have the ability to use the Force, and you can pick relatively where you end up, and where and when. So, what would you guys pick? For a tier 3 Star Wars question. Now, his additional questions are like, what era would you choose, which is part of that. For tier 3, yes, you can choose the species. Although you can't choose other things. Actually, no, you can't choose species for tier 3, can you? So no, you cannot choose species. Sorry, my bad. You cannot choose the species. You are human. Sorry, I forgot about tier 4 for a second there. The crystal planet. Why hazardous? What is wrong with you? Some additional questions he added here, or she, I don't know, it's anonymous. Where do you think you would like to be? Do you think you could live in the Chiss Ascendancy? Would you use your knowledge of the universe to try and steer its direction and try to get involved with some of the big events to change the outcome? Or would you stay out of it and fiddle in the background, or would you just retire? Coruscant, huh? That's an interesting one. Let's assume for the sake of this question that you can use the Force, because this is a tier 3. So let's just go ahead and accept that. You are a Jedi, or a Force user, whatever. You would be starting off with no real skill, of course. You would have no idea how to use the Force, but you would have the capacity to use the Force. So let's go ahead and add that into the mix there. So DeNoble, of course, would immediately join the Sith. As for myself, I'm not sure. I suppose we have to define if it's EU or AU. Let's assume for the sake of this that this is the EU. Let's just presume that for the moment, because there's more in the EU. It would make you a target, Dakota. Have fun! Ooh, Voss. That's an interesting choice. Although, apparently, they all have this breath that smells of rancid spice or something. I don't know. That might be biased information. I have to admit, what I'm thinking is I'd probably rewind time a little bit before the Clone Wars. Significantly before the Clone Wars. Because... see, from my perspective, I only see two real options. Either do everything in my power to affect the setting, or just completely stay out of it. One of the two. And the former is extremely dangerous and deadly, so I have to admit I'd kind of be inclined... I'd kind of be inclined to just go ahead and find a little spot in the universe and just retire. You know what I mean? Just be like, yeah, I'm out. I'm out. Peace. Only EU stuff, Tigzar. Only EU stuff. If you have a particular AU thing, you could say that as well, but we got to distinguish the two. Lol. Vigilant. So if I was going to retire, I'll tell you exactly what I would do. I would choose... let's say about 60 or 70 years before the prequels, right? Before Episode 1. And setting up on Naboo. And very quietly and smallly using what little force powers I have in as quiet a ways as I can to make sure I don't get any attention on anyone. Just to make a nice little living for myself. Basically just kind of retire. And just kind of allow that. That's what I'd be most likely to do, because Star Wars is incredibly dangerous as of a setting, and things can go very, very against you, even if you have the Force. A Jedi who's in a ship that gets destroyed is dead, no matter how much Force power you have, right? However, if I was going to try and get involved, that's actually kind of tough. I'm not sure. I'd have to think about that. Could you bring your own weapons? No. You got the clothes on your back. And that is it. I'm sorry, who? That's from a forbidden topic I'm not bringing up right now. Although Leia, let's be honest with ourselves, it did not live through her ship being blown up. Sorry to point that out. If her ship had been blown up, she would have died. All that happened is her ship took a little bit of damage. I would never live on Alderaan. The Killicks. That's all I gotta say about that. Yikes. I'm not sure. So, okay, let's readjust the question, guys, here for a second. That's not a technically. Her ship did not blow up. Imagine if her ship just blew up. Okay, so what's she gonna do? Move herself back to the rest of the debris and then die there? The best she could do is be conscious for the last few minutes of her life. Anyways. So let's change the question slightly. Let's assume you have to get involved. Like the question is, you are getting involved in the setting in a way, either to be a part of it or to change it. What do you pick? Like, where would you insert yourself if the point is you need to pick a specific topic and go for it? Oh, looks like the Manchester United and Brighton Hove match just started. No, Django. Funnily enough, I was thinking the Separatists too in the prequel era, during the Clone Wars, or just before the Clone Wars. Basically, give myself a few years before the Clone Wars to train and to grow and to learn. Well, that's easy to quit. I just pick Alderaan. Enjoy the Alps, and then die. Know that you will be directly referenced in A New Hope. But yeah, I have to admit, I'm tempted by the idea of intervening in the Separatists' crisis. Not working for the Separatists. If anything, I'd probably try to position myself to be useful for what will eventually become the Galactic Empire. And the idea would be to try and find my own little corner of the universe and just kind of be ignored there. Basically, the idea here would be to eventually become an Imperial warlord. So, work my way up to being an admiral or a moff or whatever of some backwater area which isn't super important to anything. So that I'm not dragged into the Galactic Civil War. I'm not dragged into any of the other garbage that happens. I'm just over here on my own. Palpatine dies. And then, woohoo! And of course, since this is the EU, I could be a good person and actually try and take care of my people properly, rather than being cartoonishly evil, and I could get away with that. If this is the AU, well, my choices get a lot more limited in the AU, because in my opinion, the post-Return of the Jedi stuff in AU is horrible. And again, I'm not going to talk about, forbidden topics, but just ignoring the movie that I'm not talking about. The AU is just like a nightmarish hellscape for its entirety of its existence. It's like, okay, so Return of the Jedi happens, and then everything gets worse. The Republic gets refounded and immediately becomes a stupid, corrupt, horrible organization. The First Order goes off and just starts conquering the crap out of the outer, not the Outer Rim, the unknown regions. And then they come back and start conquering the crap out of everything, and they're like the neo-Nazi horrible people. It's all a nightmare. There's nothing good there. Right? So there's no, so if I was tossed into the AU, my first thought would be, no, would be my first thought. So that only leaves going before the AU. And in that case, the only option I have is to try and prevent the Galactic Empire from ever being founded and just living with the Old Republic. So, okay. Would I know it's the AU? Well, yeah, you get the choice as you're being tossed into it. No, it's not as much of a nightmare as 40k, but nothing is as much of a nightmare as Warhammer 40k. Cthulhu Lovecraftian-esque stuff is not as bad as Warhammer 40k. Just saying. Well, of course, see, Huthor, I get what you're saying, but what you're saying is from a fictional perspective. From a tier perspective, imagine you are being transported into the setting, and all of a sudden you can understand why the EU becomes a little more desirable than the AU, right? At least I hope you can understand. It's something I've said so many times. We can find horrible settings fascinating and interesting from a fictional perspective, but we'd never want to live there. Imagine a Tier 3 set into Fallout. Anywhere in Fallout. Just think about that for a second. Blah, you know? No thank you. I like it, Mandarton. You should call the next one the Super Mega Death Doom. In fact, hang on. Do I still have that picture? Yeah, I'd never want to live in The Witcher either. There's actually a lot of settings I would never want to live into unless we're like Tier 5 or maybe Tier 4, which is basically full control. Hi, Sakage. Doesn't look like I have the picture here. Give me a second. Yeah, it doesn't look like I have it. There's this fake picture of like the super mega ridiculous Star Destroyer. Not want to live in Warcraft? I mean, there's a lot of places I would not want to live in Warcraft. But mostly just the tentacle-ridden places. Or in the Nether, for example. Probably not on Outland, but then again, we don't really know what's going on in Outland right now. Give me a second, guys. That would be Tier 5... No, that would be Tier 4, I think, Micromano. Tier 4 is the one that allows you to just be basically whatever the hell you want to be. Tier 4 is the tier of total choice. It means you get to pick who you are, when you are, what you are, where you are. You know, you get to say, I want to be a super powerful Jedi, to use Star Wars as an example, set in the year -19 BBY in Naboo at this city, and I want to be this species. That's Tier 4. It's total choice. The difference between Tier 4 and Tier 5 is Tier 4, you get to choose everything, and then you're tossed in. Tier 5, you get tossed in, and then you retain total control. Tier 5 is basically the holodeck thing. And Tier 5 only really exists because there are some settings which I would never want to be in unless it was Tier 5. Like Fallout. I'm not finding the thing. That would be Tier 4, Uthor, because Tier 4 is the total choice tier. There it is, I found it. Hang on. This is the... the SDSD Freudian Nightmare. Here, I'm just going to link this in chat because there's a lot of text. I'm not going to read the whole thing. This is what I think of when I think of the supremacy. If you have time, I recommend reading the whole thing. It's hilarious. Even if you don't read the whole thing, just look at the picture. You can see the Eclipse and the Sovereign. You can see the Executor. If you zoom in, you can see the ISDs down there, the tiny little dots next to that thing. Yes, I have noticed that hazardous. Yeah, that's... Look at that thing. It's so stupid. Aside from the minor note that some of our turbo laser turret gunners have starved to death when their food shipments were cut off by the war zone, there's little else to remark on, save that in our first tactical drill during the course of a 2-hour right turn, we failed to halt our rotation, with the result of the subsequent and very unfortunate destruction of the entire Coruscant 4th Defensive Fleet. Oops. I do like the profile. If the ship was smaller, that's a neat little ship design. But, yeah. No, it's the Super Duper. I'm pretty sure it's the Super Duper Star Destroyer. The Ultra Class Star Destroyer is what they call it here, so I don't know. Anyways. So, so let's go ahead and cut off. So I hope that answers your question. I will link this video in that. So I got another question I thought was an interesting one to talk about here. Q&A 2. Mass Effect. And CD Projekt... I hope I'm spelling that right. Let's see here. So, here's the question. What, Czar? What do you think the Mass Effect trilogy would be like if CD Projekt Red had produced it instead of BioWare? What changes to the story do you think they would have made? Or do you think they would have gone with a completely different one? How well would the characters have fared, and do you think they would be more fleshed out? Would they be more shades of gray or black and white? Do you think they would handle the more touching... How do you think they would handle the more touching moments like Morden's sacrifice? So what do you think, guys? Imagine if Mass Effect... Oh, gotcha, sir. Imagine if Mass Effect was always being made by CD Projekt Red. The Reapers would have won. I'm sure the gameplay would be completely different. Funnily enough, we might get an insight into that when Cyberpunk comes out. Ah, Mindard. You're asking me? I'm not the person to ask this question. More racism. More racism? I mean, Mass Effect already had way too much racism. What do I mean by always? Imagine BioWare doesn't exist. Oop, hang on. There we go. Perfectly balanced, as all things should be. And now imagine that CD Projekt Red has denounced their new IP. It's this brand new thing they're coming out with called Mass Effect, which is a science fiction-based RPG. Based on Babylon 5, inspired by Babylon 5. Oh, fair enough, Tigzar. Yeah, I'm not sure what I think of the shooter thing. I will say this. I kind of like the idea of, I know this is going to sound weird, an action RPG with shooter mechanics. In other words, rather than, just locking on and shooting, you aim and shoot, but you have, like, abilities and functionality you can do which make your shots do more or hit more or whatever. So there would still be actual shooting, shooting mechanics, but it would be more skill-based than just the shots. I would also say that they would probably make it so that the main character more or less has to be, like, limiting your abilities, in other words. Like, you have to be a, mage. God, I can't think of what they're called all of a sudden. See if I can think of it before 50 people say it in chat. Closing my eyes just so I can't see it. Nope, I give up. It's a biotic. Yep. God damn. So the ability to, basically forcing you to be a biotic in playstyle. And they deciding... what I'm trying to say is I could see them limiting your gameplay options more, rather than letting you be soldier, biotic, engineer, or some combination. You're a biotic. Or you're an engineer. Picking something, basically. But probably fleshing out that specific thing more than we got in the Mass Effect games. I also imagined that they would change the games wildly each game, but then again, that's based on the Witcher series, so who knows if that's true or not. Also, that's true in the actual Mass Effect games, so who the hell knows. I have no preference on that, Huthor, personally. I'm cool with whichever. I like being able to play, a blank slate character, Oblivion style, and I like playing a pre-written character. So, I have no preference. Ow. Ow. I should just put the heating pad back on. Choices would probably matter a lot more, I agree. At least within the games. I also had a thought about it. I have a weird feeling that if we're to presume that this is, a complete rewrite of history, Mass Effect 1 would be kinda crap, Mass Effect 2 would be pleh, and then Mass Effect 3 would be awesome, and one of the best games ever. Because Tigzar there asked the relevant question. Is this something they made instead of the Witcher series? Or something that they made, you know, after the Witcher series? If it's instead of, I've already given my theories on that. If... I'm just saying it's total garbage, Eingrod, along with Daggerfall. Now, now that being said, let's presume that this is after Witcher 3. Let's say instead of Cyberpunk, CD Projekt Red has come up with this new game called Mass Effect. Now that being said, I think Mass Effect would actually be one game. And with the virtue of being a singular game, and with the financial backing that CD Projekt Red has now, I think they would have worked on that for several years, and I think they would go ahead and make your choices matter more, make it more, you know, branching, give you more options, more nuance, etc. Yeah, exactly. It would be one very large Mass Effect game. And let's presume for a moment that it keeps some of the same basics, you know, Babylon 5, Solarians, Garrus, the Citadel, the Reapers, that kind of a thing. That being said, I kind of like the idea that it would be, I suppose, similar in structure to Witcher 3. As weird as that sounds. In other words, there's your main centralized quest, right? And this main quest is obviously the fight against the Reapers. But then there's also all sorts of side stuff you could do, going over to Noveria, or going off to, you know, deal with Jacob's issues, you know, that kind of a thing, right? And those would be side stuff you could do. Basically the same structure as any given open-world RPG, just approached slightly differently. And you got to get those war assets. It's very important. No, war assets wouldn't exist. I also wonder what they would do with anything other than the footbound stuff. Like, do you think they would have the Mako at all? Or any kind of vehicle section? Do you think they might have a space section? Do you think they'd have the scanning minigame? You know, stuff like that. Well, I actually accented the this ducking, Eingrad, by another 10 decibels, so that should be what you're hearing. I don't know. I can't hear it. I suppose I will hear it when I rewatch this VOD at some point, if I remember to do so. Of course, Naztharun. It just depends on how well it's written. And of course we would have Space Gwent. They wouldn't call it that, but it would be Space Gwent. I don't know how to answer that question, Hazardous. That's assuming so many different things. Like, if we're assuming that everything everything is just as is linearly up to Mass Effect 3, and then all of a sudden CD Projekt Red makes the Citadel DLC, I think they'd probably have made the clone storyline even sillier and, you know, more ridiculous for humor factor. But otherwise, I think they would have still handled the character stuff pretty much exactly as they did. I don't think so, Zedslayer. I know they played poker. So, Django, of course, says, we don't know. Let me ask a slightly more specific question, and several people in chat have already said it, I was just waiting. So let's assume that what happens is, instead of CD Projekt Red working on Cyberpunk, they're working on Andromeda. And Andromeda is being made by Projekt Red instead. So the only things that have to be the same are, it's in another galaxy, and that's it. Mass Effect Andromeda is just a Mass Effect game being made by a different studio. What do you think? No faces, tired jokes, please. Probably Tigzar. That is the usual path for any creative work, or any creative group, whether it's an individual or an entity. Let's assume that I bought EA, so I am now in charge of EA. And I have decided, hey, CD Projekt Red, you can work on Andromeda. And that's what's happening. So EA is not a problem. Are you sure, Halo? Okay, Mandartin. I mean, I have explained why my company's so terrible. At least was in the past. Obviously, EA is not terrible anymore. Because all of a sudden, we have a brain. I'll tell you what I think. I think that what they would have done if they were making Andromeda is they would have basically nixed most of the expedition. Get rid of the ridiculously huge super ships. Get rid of the Citadel 2.0. Just eject all of that. Give them, like, one of the things that bothered me most about Andromeda is we got to a new galaxy, and we already felt like we were walking around the city, right? It didn't feel like the wilderness. It didn't feel like the old Wild West or whatever. It felt like we were just next door, right? Get rid of all of that. Make it so that we really do feel like we're out in the middle of nowhere with basically nothing. Give us a colony ship which has a outpost, which we have established barely, which is made of like pieces of the ship we came here in on like the desert planet that we started. I can't remember the name of it, but you know what I'm talking about. No, it's okay, Hazard. If I bought EA, there would be no shareholders. But yeah, and then focus far more on the alien stuff. Focus far more on the survival aspect. Not as in like a survival gameplay, but as in the survival of your colony. Make more of the quests and the interactions about trying to make this area work for your people, rather than just being about, okay, so we've got some bandits who already have their own colony over there that they've established. Can you go deal with them? And yeah, I would actually have the resources you gather matter, not just for like special abilities and upgrades, but for specifically how your colony develops, and as a consequence, what quests you get. I would have probably ejected the Ket entirely. I'm sorry, I'm talking more myself. This is supposed to be CD Projekt Red, but in all honesty, if you handed me Mass Effect Andromeda, I would kick the Ket right out of the story. We don't need a singular major antagonist to make Andromeda interesting. I don't know. You cannot alter. Yeah, exactly. Make nature the enemy. Make lack of resources the enemy. Make your own disparate elements the enemy. You don't need to have the big bad guys who have super ships and the ability to assimilate new people. I kept calling them the Bioborg, because I actually kept forgetting their names when I was talking about it like last month. Yeah, no kidding, Tigzar. I mean, hell's bells. We could have had it so that the, I can't remember their name, species, the dominant species in the sector, or the system, excuse me, is a species that isn't entirely friendly. Like, have multiple of their people be against us. Either because they themselves are factionalized, or because, they're having a civil war element, or something. You're welcome, Zara. That's what I'm here for. I'm going to agree with you, Sonashi, while completely disagreeing with you. Because obviously this would be pushing away from a typical space opera thing, but I also think that's a good thing. That's why I'm agreeing with you and disagreeing with you. Let's do it! Let's just have a new thing. We don't need a big bad guy. We don't need... We don't need a Hollywood game, okay? Let's just summarize all of my problems with Andromeda by one word. Hollywood. Andromeda's story was way too Hollywood. And it didn't have any depth to it. It didn't have the complexity or nuance it needed. It didn't have interesting character. I couldn't even tell you a single character in that game right now's name. Not one. So, well, the idea would probably be you would have multiple options with that sea bear. Do we work with some of the factions of I can't remember their names, in order to, basically push them towards us? Trying to get involved in their internecine affairs to press our own agenda? Or do we try to just kind of stay distanced from these people? That kind of a thing. Now, I do think we should have a singular, let's call it a face, who is against us. Like that dog, for example. Let's see, hang on. Naming characters from Andromeda. Let's see if I can do this. So we've got Human Lady, Asari Girl, I am Archon! I remember him. The AI? Does that count? The alien dude, he was cool. I can't remember the alien dude's name. God, what's the alien dude's name? Sonoshi just gave a list of the names, and I don't recognize any of those names. Except PB, that's a sorry girl. Hello, Bep. And by the way, hello... Oh, gosh, it already scrolled up the screen. Hans Yolo, what's up, guys? Welcome back. Jal! Jal, that's alien dude. He was cool. I like Jal. He was one of the only characters I actually liked in that entire game. Ow. Except for Archon, he was the best. He was the best guy, wasn't he? He was my favorite villain. You remember that one time where he... Oh god, I'm suddenly actually struggling to think of a scene of his that was memorable. You remember when he said, "I am Archon"? Wasn't that awesome? I'm done. I mean, I wasn't even that against Andromeda compared to other people, and I still found that story to just be simplistic. Like I said, Hollywood. The dad of who? Oh, your dad! Right. The guy who dies in the first second. Wasn't he awesome? How he died, like, minutes into the game. That's not even a spoiler. It's like the first thing that happens. Alright, we're on a new planet. Oh my god, my dad's dead! I do remember that's the one. When all of the sudden, in like the second to last cutscene of the entire game, all of a sudden there was actually good facial animations. It wasn't just for him, too. It was just out of nowhere. It was just weird. Anyways. That's all I got. So let's go ahead and chop this off. Because the next thing we're doing is getting back into BFA.